guys, welcome back to another exciting video. This is not so much a video for you as it is a kind of video for a bug report slash feature request for the Stormworks bug tracker. I tried to do a text one and it was shut down pretty quick because I didn't exactly explain properly, I guess, with pictures and images or something. I don't know exactly. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a video and we're just going to talk about what I'm talking about for the bug feature slash defect request thing. So let's get started. So as you know, we're working on the Convoy 1943 add-on live event script for Stormworks, which we'll be doing here on the channel. If you're not subscribed, you may want to do that so you don't miss it. But this is a ship built by Eggnog, of course, with all the detail and all the functionality with weapons and hedgehogs and what else? I don't know. Depth charges, guns, of course. And it has ropes, and it has a lot of detail here. And Stormworks doesn't like that too much. So let's just really quick look at what this has given us. So first off, this is F2, the physics bodies. It's showing you everything that's trying to calculate. It's pretty well optimized as far as, like, if I were to build it, there'd be a lot more little tiny blocks in the hole. But this one looks pretty darn good. It looks lovely. I don't think anybody could complain about this. So, yeah, looks good. So let's go into F1 and see what we got on the stats here. So looking at the stats, they look pretty darn good considering all the things that are going on with this thing right now. There is 133 FPS for the game itself. The logic is 62 frames per second. The physics are 62 frames per second. Ocean, 62 frames per second. Everything looks pretty good. So we can't complain. Eggnog, good job. So here's how I test this. So right now, for one ship, by myself, this is fine. But we're going to need at least 4 builds. So what I'm going to do is going to go ahead and spawn 2 of these and see what happens. I'm placing 2 451s, the original build that Egg did with all of the features, the hedgehogs, the depth charges, and guns. Let's go ahead and spawn 2 and see what Stormworks does. Alright, so they spawned, and we're getting the warnings, which are going to go away. And so we have 2 of these now. So if we're playing a multiplayer game, we would like to have 2 of these sea vessels plus 2 subs. But we're just going to start with 2 of these. It's also worth noting that I've been told that Stormworks doesn't do a few things that many games do to optimize rendering. So we're not talking about physics, just 3D rendering, because these are basically 3D models inside the game once they come out here. The first thing is instancing. So most games, if you load a model of a car, it is loaded into memory, and then when you load it again, it references that model already in memory. Stormworks, from what I'm told, does not do that. So once we load this ship once, and then we load it again, these are 2 separate models being loaded into the game into memory. So that could have an impact, probably minimal, because Stormworks is pretty low polygon, so we don't really have that, but that's just one thing. Second thing is, there is no level of detail. So level of detail is, these are 3D models, they have a lot of complexity when they're rendered out here. All the guns, all the rails, all the pipes, all that stuff. So if we were to come back here, the game is still rendering all the detail way over there that it does when we're close up. And so that has an impact on frame rate because there is no level of detail models being swapped out. So the complexity of that model does not minimize. So that's something, again, pretty small with Stormworks when it comes to like all of the polygons and all that stuff, but it does have an impact on the 3D game rendering, okay? Not the physics. We're just talking about rendering the 3D, which is the overall performance of the graphics, okay? All right, just thought I'd throw that out there, just so you know. That's something we're thinking about as we're, like, building these ships and stuff like that. Okay, so this is the original version of Eggnog's ship with all the details, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and hit F1 and see what kind of stats we're getting on 2 of them. We've now dropped down to 111 versus 133 on the game's performance, okay? Not bad. FPS has dropped to 62 on logic, 61 on physics, and 61 on ocean. I'm sure that's fluctuating. I just happened to capture it at 62. So it's probably going 61, 62. Not too bad. Okay, so we could probably run these on a, against each other with not too much problem. So now let's get 4 of these out. Okay, so I'm spawning 4 of these. Now the idea here is that we want 4 ships on the multiplayer game, and they're going to be fighting each other, okay? So each one of these is, again, not an instance. So once I add this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, it's being loaded into memory 4 different times. There is no level of detail, so each one of these being rendered out is going to hit the performance on the game's 3D, not the physics, just 3D. And then, of course, we have the physics, which are the pivots and the subbodies on the back there with all these things in the front. So, okay, we're expecting bad performance with 4 of these. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so here's where you see the performance start to degrade. So now we're down from 133 game FPS. That's like the game rendering the islands and everything and the ships and all that stuff. That's the FPS for the game itself, 133. We're now down to 88 frames per second. Originally, we had 62 frames per second with logic, physics, and ocean. We've now dropped with 4 of these by half. So now we're down to 32, 32, and 32, okay? So now you can see there's a big drop off once we have 4 of these running, okay? So this is not going to be too playable. You can see we're going into moon graphics, okay? So what this is leading to is I asked A, can you please optimize this thing? We're going to be running 4 vessels, and we need to clean this up. We need to do some tests, strip it down, strip these ropes down, anything that's going to cause physics issue, okay? So let's go ahead and grab another build. All right, so now we have the 451 with no ropes. We took off the hedgehogs in the front, which were sub-bodies, the depth charges, and the Y launchers, I think. I think that's everything. Oh, and the lifeboats that were hooked there, okay? So now we're stripping it down just to basically the pivots that are in 2 guns in the back, 2 guns on the top, and 1 in the front there, okay? Quite a bit of guns, but again, you would think they would be not too bad. So we've gone ahead and spawned 4 of these. You're going to note that they now sit a little bit lower in the water, and that's because subbodies tend to make things float, I'm told, which is a thing. But the idea here is we just want to see, after removing the depth charges, hedgehogs, and Y launchers, what kind of performance we got. Oh, also in the ropes. So let's look. Our game 3D performance has increased from 88 to 96. Our FPS has only gone up from 32 to 49. Interesting, right? Interesting. What could it be? What could it be? So this is what happened. We did this, and then I argued with Egg that we need to strip it down even more to increase performance. So I think I ended up stripping off like most of the railings and all that stuff, trying to keep the guns, thinking that they were not really the problem. But let's go ahead and see what model I have. I'm probably going to skip around between the different tests that I did, just because I did so many things, I might have deleted them. But let's go ahead and see what we got. All right, so we are skipping ahead to some of the tests I did. Of course, I did several tests where I tried to remove all the stuff on top of the deck that were decorations. I tried to remove all the stuff inside that were decorations and just streamline all the blocks, okay? But we're going to skip to the part because that didn't really do much. We've made the whole boat one color because sometimes painting different colors apparently is supposedly causing issues with builds. I don't know, but we went ahead and went all pink. And of course, we removed all of the logic. So none of these boats have logic blocks inside. There's no microcontrollers, no logic, okay? Let's see what it does with the frame rate. All right, so we have gone up from 96 game FPS to 99. Our logic, our physics, and our ocean has jumped up from 49 to 50. So by removing all those logic blocks that were in there was quite a few, we only went up by 1 frame for the physics logic stats. So the final test that kind of made me submit the bug report or the feature request, and you can see now it's sitting really low in the water, is that I have removed the pivots from the guns. So the front gun right there, the 2 guns on top, and the 2 guns in back now no longer are using pivots at all, okay? There's no pivots. So what do you think that's going to give us? 4 ships, no pivots. Let's check it. So the last test was no logic, but it had pivots, and the frame rate was 99, and logic, physics, and ocean was 50 frames per second, okay? With no pivots, we go to 93, which is a little bit odd. Maybe I just caught it at the wrong time. But our logic and physics and ocean go up to 62 frames per second, okay? That's good. Okay, let's go ahead and do something else now. Let's spawn more of these. Okay, we're now spawning 10 of these ships. They have no logic and no pivots for the guns. They do have ropes, though, apparently. Oops, I left the ropes in. Oh, that was probably why we had a few frames below the last one. We can get rid of those ropes in a second. But let's go ahead and look at this really quick. See what the ropes do. Alright, so with no logic and no pivots, frame rate was 93 frames per second for the game, 62 frames per second for logic, physics, and ocean. We now spawned 10 of these, and our FPS is down to 68, which is totally playable. That's for the game. And now our logic is 34 frames per second. There we go. And that's with the ropes. So I want to get rid of the ropes because I want to see how much of that is a problem. Okay, I removed the rope just to see what that does. I know that kind of messes up my test here, but the idea is we spawn 10 of these, and we want to see what it's like without the ropes, without the pivots, and without the logic. Okay, and let's go ahead and do our little test. Okay, so with the ropes, we're getting 68 frames per second game, and 34 on the physics, logic, and ocean. Okay, so we took off the ropes, and we get we get a slight decrease by 1 frame for the game, and we gain 4 frames per second on the logic, physics, and ocean. Okay, so you might be thinking, why am I showing you this? Because there's 10 of these. You're never going to run 10 of these in a multiplayer game. That is correct. But by doing this, by spawning 10 of these, I can really see where the problems are when I delete something. So if I delete pivots, whatever, I can see where the problem is, and I can say, okay, that was actually causing more of an issue. Actually, we've been spawning 8 of these. That's not the point. The point is that I doubled the 4, which is 4 players, and we have our FPS, which means if I get rid of 4 of these, we now have a completely playable game. What does that mean? Let's look. We now have 93 frames per second and 62 frames per second for logic, physics, and ocean. Okay? All mainly not because we removed the logic and the ropes, but because we removed the pivots. Okay? Does that make sense? We removed the pivots from the guns. They can't move, but now we can run 4 of these, and everybody will have almost perfect frame rate and great physics. Okay? Let me show you one more thing. Alright, so we've now spawned 4 ships, and this was a test that was suggested by Eggnog. So what we did is we removed the gun blocks and left the pivots. Let me show you. Let me go up over here. And we have no gun blocks, just the pivots. Just the pivots here, pivots there. And of course we have the pivots back here, okay? So let's go back over here. So I'm standing in the correct place, if that matters. I don't think it does, but we're going to stand back here. Let's see what the frame rate does. So because we've removed the gun blocks, we have an increase of game performance from 93 to 100 frames per second. And we can account for that because the game is no longer rendering those gun blocks, those structures. So we're decreasing the 3D rendering on the model. We're basically taking away polygons. We've basically optimized the model for its looks. So that's why we get better frame rate. Everything else remains 62 frames per second logic, ocean, and physics. And the important part about that is it's not the pivots themselves that are decreasing the game performance. It's once you put a load on those pivots, whatever is happening behind the scenes, if it's calculating the sub-body's physics or whatever it is, that kills our physics and logic FPS. So what I suggested in the bug report is to go ahead and give us a checkbox on a pivot that says don't calculate the sub-body. Now, I don't know exactly if that's possible, but in my mind, I don't see why that wouldn't be possible to edit the engine so that a sub-body on a pivot, whatever you build on a pivot, is not calculated. It's basically a static object that can be moved around, and the game doesn't care about the physics. That, at least, is my idea on how to improve this problem, because once we add anything on these pivots, they're going to go ahead and kill the FPS. So we're running 4 of these comfortably. We could literally play a game with all 4 of these ships, and if the pivots were working and the guns were on them, we could fire at each other, and we'd only have to worry about, you know, like damage blocks or whatever might cause some lag. But right now we can't do that, because as soon as I add the gun blocks back to these pivots, we tank. We tank the FPS. So if we get a feature where we can click a checkbox on a pivot and not calculate the subbodies, I think that we should be able to put guns on ships and not have an impact on performance other than the game's 3D performance because we're rendering out a more complex 3D model, but not because of FPS physics dying because of pivots. Did I say that right? Am I making sense? I hope I am. It's hard to explain when you're trying to explain something that you're not 100% sure of what's happening behind the scenes. So I don't know how the physics engine works, but I think logically you should be able to stop the physics from being counted on a subbody. Again, all a guess, but it seems like it should be possible. It really does seem that you can turn that off. And that makes such a difference, especially when you're trying to make anything a moving turret in place. Now, maybe what needs to be done, maybe there needs to be a new type of block called a turret block, and turret blocks automatically do not calculate physics subbodies. And I think when I say that, some people are going to say, well, if you do that, then you can build whatever you want on top of it, and there's no balancing. Okay, look at the game. We don't need to balance the game. We balance our own ships. So by saying if I add a pivot that doesn't care about the weight on it, that it's breaking the game's balance as far as gameplay, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Don't even try that argument. Just give me a turret a turret pivot that doesn't calculate subbodies. Give me also a gimbal pivot, which is a single block that can pivot up and down, left and right. And again, don't apply physics to its subbodies. And I will be a very happy camper. So I think that's it. I just want to make this video so I could cut parts of it out and make a video for Deltars or the devs, whoever's looking at the video, and see what I'm talking about when it comes to pivots. Also, we wanted to try, just to see if this was something that would make a difference, is trying to turn the pivot's strength up and down and seeing if that makes a difference on FPS physics. I don't know. It seems like more of a pain in the butt than just stopping the calculations altogether. But anyways, let me know in the comments below what you think about this video. Am I completely talking out of my butt? Or if you think that I'm making any sense at all. Yeah. All right. See you next time.